Hi everyone, welcome to the Hands-on CISO podcast. My name is Adi, and today we'll be talking to Anthony Scarfe. Anthony is the Director of Security Assurance and Deputy CISO at Elastic, where he leads a globally distributed team within the InfoSec organization. Anthony has spent 2 decades in a variety of technical and leadership roles within security and has implemented information security management systems on 6 continents and would happily add Antarctica as another one. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. Nice to be
That's
here.
perfect. So happy to have you on the podcast. Before we get into anything else, I would love to hear how did you end up in security and specifically in the role that you're doing now?
Well, it's a long story. I mean, right in the beginning, I was interested in security without really knowing what that was. So I started at school and more in kind of trying to get out of networks than get into them. So kind of bypassing the proxy, bypassing filters, playing games when we weren't supposed to play games on the school computers. So basically, like finding my way around the rules was always something that I found fun. Never in a malicious way, but more as a kind of curiosity kind of thing. But it was very clear to me early on that I wanted to work with tech and with computers. So then I moved into my first real IT role was on the help desk, and then I moved through the kind of technical infrastructure track, became an architect, started to really focus on security around 2004, working for a defense contractor and building secure networks. And yeah, it's kind of grown from there. I was remained very much on the technical side of security until about 2013. Then did some work with ISO 27001. That's where I got to travel to 6 continents, kind of facilitating the implementation of information security management in different countries with new security leaders. Some of them had never been in security before. So that was a really amazing experience. That put me more on the kind of risk and compliance side of things for a few years. I came to Elastic really hungry to get back to something more technical. But while I've been at Elastic, I've kind of oscillated between the technical and compliance world and did some customer trust work as well, which is really nice. That the customer trust side of things really gets you in touch with the business, and that's something that I really enjoyed as well.
Interesting. So you were moving around different places, basically building from the ground up the security system.
Yeah, exactly. So
Interesting. How does that work?
It was really kind of taking a leadership team in a particular part of the business that I was working in, helping that leadership team to understand what's important to them, what are their security risks, what do they need to focus on, what do they need to care about. So starting very much from their business context and then implementing a management system that made them implement the correct controls, to monitor them, to understand which controls they get from other parts of the business, maybe shared services, things like that. So very diverse groups of people in different countries, different types of business operation. And yeah, really helping to put security in their context.
Interesting. What was your day-to-day like back then versus what is it now?
Back then, I spent a lot of time in airports.
Nice.
It was, yeah, the way that project worked was that we spent a couple of weeks on site in the beginning, meeting the team, understanding them, understanding their operation, getting them started with a security management system. Around 12 weeks later, at the end, when we'd gotten really good at this, 12 weeks later, they should have an ISO certificate. So in the end, it was really that fast. And somewhere in between, we would do a kind of internal audit. It wasn't always like that in the beginning. It took more like a year. And then in year 2, we managed to do 4. In year 3, I think we did 14. In year 4, we did about 50. So we basically kind of built a system to go and implement these things. So I handled Asia, Africa, Oceania, a couple of things in LATAM, a couple of things in North America. And there were basically a few of us that covered different territories, which was really cool. Now it's almost the exact opposite. I work from home. Every day starts with a walk in the forest. I have 2 dogs, so 2 dogs, and usually with my wife, we walk in the morning before work. And then our team is globally distributed from, I think, Bangalore is the furthest east, and California to the west. And so my morning tends to be a bit more quiet, a bit more focused time, maybe some one-on-ones with the European folks and the Indian folks in the team. Then the afternoon is meeting craziness, because that's when the US comes online, and about 80% of our company is in the US. So the afternoons are very busy.
Interesting. And how do you manage your time in terms of how much is business, how much is more technical stuff?
I would say nowadays it's much more business and management and communication that I spend my time on. I do spend some time on technical, but I try to do that from a bit of more strategic level, right, and guide the team in the right direction and try to stay out of their work. So yeah, I would say it's probably 80-20 nowadays.
Interesting. And how much of the time, I would say, in total, like, do you see yourself learning new things and reading about incidents and reading about new technologies and just like, learning versus actually so-called doing?
Yeah, every day. And that's a big part of the role as well. Is just keeping in touch with everything that's going on. So keeping in touch with startups. I talk to a lot of startups. There's not enough time to speak to all of them, so I get a lot of kind of inbound requests to give feedback, and that's a really nice way to stay in touch with like new approaches, new ways of tackling problems. That's something I'm really very interested in kind of innovation and doing things in new ways. So yeah, between startups, VCs, my team, I read a lot of Substack. Even LinkedIn, if you train it well, can be pretty useful. Right? If you follow the right people, engage with the right people. I don't get served a lot of nonsense on LinkedIn, though I know it's out there. So yeah, I spend really a lot of time doing that, trying to kind of see what's a bit further ahead, right? What's like a year or two ahead.
How do you know what is the good content and what is more
It may be experience. I don't know. I mean, some folks are very transparent that it's pure like marketing or self promotion, and there's no kind of depth to it, right? It's I don't think it's too difficult to tell the difference. And then when you engage with the good things, the algorithm gets pretty smart at giving you more of that, and seeing who is more signal and less noise.
interesting? Good statement. In a different topic, when you're in the company, do you ever have to be the bad cop? Like, how much of your role is saying, like, putting the boundaries?
It's not often that I'd have to be the bad cop, and in fact, when I do, it's more frequently these days. It's because somebody asked me to. So somebody will specifically say, "We need you to come and swing the infosec hammer," and because I need your help, right? Because it's not my natural approach. I think what I try to put a lot of emphasis on empathy, on user experience, on understanding like the users or the business folks that we work with. What is their reality? And when you understand that, and you understand how their work actually gets done, what they get judged on, what they get incentivized by, what their performance evaluation is based on, and really kind of try to see things from their perspective, then you can communicate better with them. You can design better security solutions. You get less pushback. So it can feel like things take longer, but ultimately you get to a better solution. And that has worked really well for me in my security career. And it means that it's pretty rare that we have to be the bad cop. We sometimes do, right? Sometimes you have to say, folks, you're not getting it. How do we make this happen? But if that's your default response, then it's less effective when you need to do it. So it's nice to just only use it when it's needed.
Interesting. It also sounds like, based on your history, you've had a lot of chances to build cultures around security. And what would you say is some piece of advice or something that you learned about how to get people to even care, like to be aware of it?
I think one of the most important things is to think of it as a conversation. A lot of security folks, a lot of security teams, almost everybody does security awareness training because it's basically just become a systematic requirement of compliance, of contracts, of all these reasons we have to do it. And so I don't think that's going to go away, but it can't be the only thing. You can't just think of security or education as something that's a broadcast. It has to be a conversation, and you have to be a partner to the business. You have to listen to them. You have to understand what the users need. And if they don't feel that they're getting that from you, then they're not going to respond well. Then they're not going to care.
Interesting. Have you ever had to deal with a situation like that where it was harder to get people to understand the value?
Yes, so many. It's difficult to think of an example. Yeah, not recently, honestly. I think we're very lucky, I think, at Elastic in that we have a good security culture. We have strong support from leadership. And once we, again, if you think about how to frame the message and you communicate well, we tend to get pretty good buy-in on the things that we try to do. Again, because we don't abuse that and just kind of push for some goal of ultimate security. It's more about, here's what we need to do next. Here's what we think is achievable, and bring the folks on board with that.
How do you choose what your priorities are in terms of, I mean, I'm sure you can be working on a lot of different things, but what tells you, okay, this is the thing I need to do next?
This is a really hard problem. This is a really difficult problem. In fact, when people ask me what's the biggest problem that you're facing, that's usually what I come up with. It's how to prioritize, because the scope is so broad of what we do. And there's so much still to be done. Like everywhere in the industry, in every company, there's so much more that we can do and make better. So choosing the most important things is really difficult. The way we do it is to take a kind of strategic view of things. So what are the most important things to our business? What are the most important things that we need to protect? How far have we got with those things? Where are we? What are the things that are keeping ourselves up at night? So that's kind of really kind of big picture, zooming out, thinking about it over the longer term. And then we course correct based on signals from maybe incident response. Like what are the incident response folks seeing? What are we detecting in our environment? What are other companies like us doing? We have threat intel that not only looks at kind of indicators of threats and threat actors out there, but we always take the time to review security incidents that affect our peers or other big companies, and get a good understanding of what is actually out there right now hurting people. What are the approaches that threat actors are taking? What are the failings in a security program that's leading to people being breached? And use that to kind of refine our position and course correct and maybe change some priorities along the way.
Interesting. Has there been a big change in security over the past few years with AI becoming much more common, or would you say that security is constantly evolving and this is just another phase?
I think one change over the last few years was the pandemic making everybody go remote. That changed things, and in some ways it's a shame because that move to remote working was, I saw that as the future, right? That's where everybody's going to go. And so moving to Elastic was actually a big part of my reason for joining Elastic was the fact that we were distributed, everybody worked remotely. It forces you to think about security in a different way. And some things get easier and some things get more difficult, but it's definitely different. Then what happened with the pandemic is that accelerated that by, I don't know, maybe 10 years overnight, but everybody kind of rushed into it. And it wasn't in a thoughtful way that everybody kind of shifted to a different way of working. It just had to happen immediately. And now we've seen a bit of a rebound of return to office. Like people didn't take the time to do it properly. Plus a whole bunch of other kind of macroeconomic and external factors that changed as well. So I think the pandemic had a bigger effect on security in the short term than AI has so far. But now I think AI is the next 5 years. It's going to drive a lot of change.
Interesting. How do you see it?
I think it's an inflection point in the same way that mobile or cloud were inflection points that really just changed how technology is consumed and how technology is delivered, which obviously impacts security as well. I think like a lot of inflection points like that, it's going to be overestimated in the short term, the impact, and underestimated in the long term. And so if you think back to when cloud was really starting to take off, there were sysadmins and security guys wearing t-shirts that said there's no such thing as the cloud, it's just somebody else's computer, right? And this kind of pushback that, hey, like the cloud's not secure, the cloud can't be secure. And we've seen similar things with AI right now. Kind of people are a little bit tired by it and pushing back on it. And I think, like, if you didn't accept the cloud around like 2010 to 2015, you were left behind. And I think the same thing will happen with AI. Another thing I think that will happen is that we will kind of stop talking about it. And what I mean by that is that it will just become embedded in everything. In the same way that I'm sure your parents don't talk a lot about the cloud, but I'm sure a big part of their life uses the cloud every day. And AI will be like that. So right now it's like everybody's clamoring over each other to talk about how their new feature is AI powered, and people don't want AI. People want experiences. They want outcomes. Whether you're a consumer or a technology leader, you're in the market for better outcomes and better experiences. So the fact that it's AI powered will go away, unless you're selling AI, right? If you're part of the AI stack, like Elastic is, like OpenAI are, and you're selling to developers who are building those experiences, sure, you're gonna talk about AI. But I think for a lot of us, it will not be as talked about as it is today. It will just be
A thing.
reality.
Interesting. Do you see any other changes or shifts that you think will happen over the next few years within the security field?
Over the next few years, I think security will become more federated, more distributed. So less of a security team, very central, taking care of everything, and more security responsibility being federated across different departments. That already exists to a large extent, but I think it's the only way that we can continue to improve and do better. So it will be interesting to see how the security products market enables that. So we're already starting to see more security vendors are realizing that it's not the security team, but the developers who are going to actually be remediating problems, fixing issues. So how do we get away from kind of a security team having their dashboard to going to where the work needs to happen?
which puts it in a very much like a technical issue, more of a
Um,
anything.
I don't think it's a technical issue, but I think that tech needs to enable that in better ways, and understanding the where the work needs to happen, and the type of work. So a lot of security problems really focus on this kind of response paradigm where you go and respond to an event. But a lot of security work on the preventive side is quite different to that, right? It's more about looking at root causes, looking at broad categories of issues in big environments, and working through them to kind of lift the overall security posture. And you can't do that work one thing at a time. It has to be kind of embedded in operations. So tech is obviously an important part and one big part of it, but I think it's really about operations and business processes.
What would you say is like the biggest problem in security right now? Because we were talking about it's technical, but it's operational. But like, what do you see as the big issue or issues that currently exist?
It's, I mean, still, as I was saying earlier, I think prioritizing things is difficult. Understanding that if we go and focus all of our energy over here, it means leaving something over there, which we may know is not perfect, and nobody has a crystal ball. And I think something that adds to that is just the amount of busy work that happens. Like in one thing that frustrates me is there's this whole kind of industry of security questionnaires that get sent back and forth that take up time from security people but don't make anybody safer. So this is an issue, and it's a difficult one to solve, because the world needs trust, right? You need to have trust between organizations to get things done, for the economy to work. But how do you build that trust is really difficult, and doing that at scale with multiple vendors is really difficult. And so what sprang up there is these kind of security questionnaires, because people don't trust third-party audits, and somehow have convinced themselves that you can convince an auditor that you're secure when you're not, which is not in anybody's interest, right? So I think this idea of playing around with your scope, there's this thing that gets talked about, which is that you can have your security certification scope be different to what you're actually delivering, which I think is a massively overstated problem, if it's a problem at all. But somehow people have convinced themselves that I might trick an auditor, but I'm going to pay more respect to your spreadsheet, which is a weird conclusion to come to. And so now
Interesting.
so now we have these kind of offshore teams who just exist to review or send or answer spreadsheets, and now that will be replaced with AI that will do it instead. So you'll have AI filling in a spreadsheet that another AI will read, and still we're not making anybody safer. So there are things like that that are very frustrating.
Do you have like a vision of how you could do it in a better way?
I wish I did, because I think I would make a lot of money. Because I
Nice.
think everybody acknowledges that that is not helping anybody, right? So no, I don't know what the answer is. I think part of the answer is more continuous, more transparent. Google just announced something yesterday where they're going to start publishing CVEs for issues that they find in their environment and remediate, even if the customer doesn't have to do anything. Just to be transparent about issues, being transparent about your controls.
They're gonna
Um,
start doing that?
yeah, they're going to start doing that. So this idea of being able to give more continuous assurance on the state of your controls, a bit like a status dashboard, right? You have status dashboards for availability all the time. where you can see that somebody was 99% up. And folks like GitLab are quite transparent in publishing some of their security metrics. The problem is that the whole system, the whole industry has to accept a new way before it can work. And the current status quo is so embedded in people's expectations, in contracts, it's difficult to see how we could change it.
Interesting. Sounds like something that someone will solve at some point.
Yep, it has to. It has to. But yeah, exactly how, I don't know.
Interesting. Do you remember any situation in the past when you've had a security incident or a near security incident, or like something happened where everything was sort of on fire?
Yeah,
The face.
yeah. The one that stands out to me is Log4Shell or Log4j, which was December 21, I think. So I woke up in a hotel in Zurich. We had our Christmas, our Christmas team event for the Swiss-based folks. So I woke up with a bit of a headache, and I opened Slack, and everything was on fire. And this vulnerability was just announced, and we were impacted by it in several ways, right? So we were not breached, but that Log4j package was a part of our products. It was also a part of products that we bought from other vendors. We knew it was in our environment. We didn't yet know where, how widespread, had we been compromised. That was an interesting morning. I forgot to check out of my hotel that morning. I sat there, I was just working, and I was like, oh, this is not my room anymore.
Oh, that's so funny. How do you what do you do in that situation? Like, I'm assuming stress is very, very high, and
Yeah.
you also have a team that you have to sort of keep, manage their stress levels. Like, how do you manage it?
Yeah, my role in those situations is to try and inject some calm and clarity, right, and make sure that it's easy to make bad decisions in those stressful situations. So I try to kind of step back, observe, understand the different areas that could be impacted, right? So the security team is obviously busy. The support team may not be busy yet, but as soon as customers wake up, they're gonna be. It, PR might need to be involved. Legal might need to be involved. So in the beginning, it's about making sure that the right people are involved, that the right people are informed. So leadership understand that there's something going on. The team is handling it. We'll let you know when something changes. Making sure that decisions are being made, and things are being treated with the right priority. And that can go both ways, right? So sometimes you can over prioritize the wrong thing and get everybody into a panic when that's not necessary, or it can be the other way. So it's somehow I seem to be calm in those situations, and I think the team appreciates that. I stress about small things. The big things I seem to do better in.
I guess that's good. I mean, if you're the stressed one, then they are in a bad spot,
Yeah.
I would say. Interesting. How, when there's not an incident, when it's just like every day, you're still, as a security professional, you're very much on, like you're ready for anything to happen. Like, how do you manage that everyday simmering low stress level that is a bit different than other roles in a company, because it's like you're the person who's keeping it safe?
Mm-hmm. I make sure I take time and make sure that others know it's okay for them to take time to, when things are calm, make the most of it. It's not forever. So I mentioned already that I start every day with a walk in the forest. Sometimes I'll do that in the middle of the day if the meetings are clear, the sun's out. So I make a point when I do that of just mentioning in Slack, hey, I'm going to ride my bike, or I'm going to walk the dogs, and signaling to people that it's okay to do that. We don't expect you to just be on all the time. And so that's important in the short term, right? That's important kind of every day, but also every week, every year. So over the course of the year, I make sure I take a vacation or two as well. And again, just make it very clear to the team that that's something that we should all do. That it's important for everybody.
Is there anything you think CISOs don't do and should do, like in general?
I think in general that's a difficult question to answer. What I would say is that there are different types of CISO who come from different backgrounds, and that's great. So some like me came up on more of the kind of defensive side of security, more in like security architecture. Some were more on detect and respond, and they kind of came up and they grew through the SOC. Some come from a risk and compliance background, and that's fine. I think that we all have blind spots, and we all have things that we don't pay enough attention to. And so if you can understand what those blind spots are for you, then that's going to help. Personally, for me, it's the incident response side. I never worked there. I did a lot of work on architecture. I did quite a lot of work on compliance. So having the perspective of what do the responders think, what do they see, is always interesting to me. And an interesting approach that I came across recently was that there's this kind of story that gets shared about Amazon and Jeff Bezos having an empty chair, right? I don't know if you've heard that one, but they say he has an empty chair in his office, and in every meeting, this empty chair represents the customer, and it's kind of a reminder that you need to think about the customer. And so that's something that I've heard about for a while, but somebody taught me a different perspective recently, which is that you can kind of use that empty chair concept to represent anything. And so understanding that in a meeting you might have a group of people from a similar background, similar biases, a similar blind spot, thinking about, let's have an empty chair. What's the viewpoint we're missing? Either as a way to force yourself to think through that viewpoint, or to, even better yet, just invite somebody to take up that chair, right? So yeah, it's difficult to say that CISOs on the whole neglect something, but we all neglect something. And it might not be the same thing, but we should try to understand what it is.
Do you think organizations, in maybe it's also like a problematic question, but in general, tend to think they're more secure than they are, or they have a good understanding, or less, or they're actually in a better position than they think?
That's a problematic question. No, just kidding. I think it oscillates. I think for most of us, it kind of oscillates between feeling great. No, we don't have a handle on this. It feels great. We have a handle on this. So, things like constantly getting some assurance about your security posture is important, and getting an external view on that is important. So we try to use assessments, whether those are kind of program assessments where we're talking about how we manage security, or the more technical assessments like red team exercises, and just constantly getting that kind of feedback that helps you to adjust where you are. And of course that contributes to the feeling that sometimes you feel great. Hey, the red team couldn't get in. We're on top of the world. And then, something else will tell you, hey, you're not finished yet. You still have work to do. On the whole, whether people underestimate or overestimate, I don't know. I don't know that I can answer that. I think there's a lot to be done. There are a lot of security problems that we're very aware of that need to be fixed everywhere. So I'm not talking about my own team or my own organization, but just in general, like it's a mess out there. So if anybody's feeling too confident, that's maybe a bit of a red flag.
Interesting. If I look at people who are getting into security, either from straight from college or from other fields, I've heard really people coming from all fields at this point, so I guess anything. What would you say is something they should have in mind in terms of like their priorities of what they should be thinking about? Because I hear a lot about how there's like a shortage of people with skills, with knowledge, like security professionals, but then also people who want to get into security are having a hard time.
Mm-hmm. I think my advice would be to understand what your strengths are and how that fits into security. So a lot of this is a very, very diverse and broad field. So if your view of what it means to be in security is that I really want to be a SOC analyst or I really want to be a pen tester, those are pretty well-defined skill sets that you need to have. But there's a lot more to security than that, right? It's not just pen testing and exploit dev, which I see a lot of young people are really excited about those things. They're the cool things, they're the sexy things. You see them in movies. And nobody's making movies about really well-disciplined identity and access management, but it's a really important job. And so understanding kind of, are you somebody who's very organized? Are you somebody who's a great communicator? Are you somebody who's really good in stressful situations? Like these different strengths that you have, yes, you can learn new skills, you can learn new strengths, you can grow on your strengths, but there's something in you that you enjoy, that you love, that you're good at. Find how that fits in security. Don't just kind of come at it from the other side, right? There's definitely a place for you, so don't give up.
It just sounds like is it a thing that's commonly discussed like within the security professionals, like the situation of people coming in and how the whole side of it is?
There's definitely a challenge in getting people who are new to security, or even new to the workplace at all, right? To a level where you can trust them with important work. That's really the gap. Is it's more of a kind of onboarding and a ramp up time. And so the SOC is a great place to come in and learn, because you have traditionally, at least, you have that kind of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 thing where there's a well-defined path. That path is harder in other parts of security, but you can take a shortcut, or you can't really take a shortcut. You can come in from having built relevant experience in other areas. So if you've been an engineer and you've been building systems and you start to spend time thinking deeply and taking action towards making those systems more secure, then it's going to be easier for you to move into a security role. Likewise, moving from the business side into a GRC role is something that can happen. So if maybe you're in legal, maybe you're in finance, and you work with things like audit a lot, then there's a kind of natural path where you can't really do that straight out of college, but there are roots in. I think it's another area that AI is going to help, in that things like security assistance, being able to give somebody a playbook that's generated by an LLM based on context that gives them the right steps. I think those things are really going to help get people ramped up more quickly in security, kind of accelerating their experience.
Interesting. I've heard from a lot of CISOs different opinions about starting in security as like your career path versus doing something else before and then moving to security. As some people say, like, you should just, like, if that's what you are interested in, you should just go straight in security, find the field that interests you most and go that way. But I've also heard a lot that like having some experience with engineering or IT or the business side, or like I've spoken to people who studied psychology, to be like everything, that having that extra kick is something very valuable. Like, how do you see that?
I think to some extent, anybody who's in a security leadership role today, kind of my generation, maybe a little bit older, we have some bias because that's what we did. Because there wasn't really a security industry when we started. Right? There wasn't a security industry for us to go into really, in the sense that there is today. So most people who are in security leadership roles now came at it from a different angle, and so we kind of see that as the path. So I think it's very valid. I think there's a lot of value in that. We have hired people who didn't come from a security background, but showed that interest and were doing security things in wherever they were because they cared about it and were passionate about it. So I think it's a very valid path, but I'm cautious to say it's the only way. And I have heard people say that, right? That security is not there are no entry level roles in security, right? You hear people say that, and I don't think that can be true. I don't think that can be true, even if it might have been when we started.
It's interesting. I think it's a very like true statement to say that when people say you can't start in security, it could be just a reflection of when they started, you couldn't start in security. But maybe now things look different.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I have two final questions that are more about your experience within the field. So, firstly, is there anything that keeps you up at night, like in terms of the job?
Not in a kind of very acute way, right? It's rare for me to lie in bed thinking about a specific problem. But there is this kind of more general, everything's hard, I'm stressed, how am I going to fit it all in? I need a vacation that keeps me up at night. I think the big problems, the problems that cause me that kind of mental anguish, it's usually the people problems rather than the technical ones. Making sure we're doing the right things for the team, making sure that people have the support that they need. And in the same way that when you make mistakes, and we all make mistakes, that the people ones are the hardest. So yeah, I think what keeps me up at night, and like I said earlier, I tend to be very good in the really difficult situations and then get stressed in the small ones. So often it's a really dumb thing that keeps me awake at night, or a stupid song going around my head.
Nice. So the other side of the question would be, what are the things that get you excited about the role, about what you're doing? Because you've been doing this a while, like in very different ways, but still always in the security field. What is it for you?
It's really exciting. There's always more to do. There's always there are times, and I talked about some of the frustrations before, but in general, there's new approaches, there's innovation, there's ways we can just improve things for each other, for our colleagues, for the business, solving problems. I love solving problems, and there's always problems to be solved in security. So it's kind of impossible to get bored. So that's what keeps me excited. I have a short attention span, like many of us nowadays, and it's just impossible to get bored.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been really interesting.
Thank you, Eddie. It's been great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure.